Is Father Tom Knobloch. Father Tom is a priest of our diocese, ordained in 1987. Currently serves as pastor of Sacred Heart in Sauk Rapids and Annunciation in Mayhew Lake, as well as being the vicar for healthcare ethics and vicar for clergy for the diocese. He holds a PhD in healthcare ethics from St. Louis University and recently assumed a role with diocesan cemeteries. And his presentation today is titled, "The Ending of Present Things, the Beginning of Things to Come, Cemetery Management as a Work of Mercy and Witness to Eternity." So welcome, Father Tom.
Thank you, Joe.
If I had known that the wall was painted the same color as the slides, I would have done that different. So I should have done a little more research. Father Crane and I differ in a variety of ways. The most relevant for today is that he knows what he's talking about. So on the wall there you see from the gym, you can rate me 4, 3, 2, 1. Wow, good job, keep on trying, or need more effort. So when we're all done. We just finished the clergy conference. Mary Healy, Dr. Mary Healy spoke to us about evangelization and the Gospel of Mark. And one of her slides was a composite of every parish secretary you've ever seen, or been. And she pointed out that you are the primary evangelizers in your parish communities. You're the first point of contact for so many people. And how that relationship goes has an enormous impact on the life of the church. So thank you for all the work that you do. You should give each other a round of applause, I think. Maybe a standing ovation, but we can do that later. So you know that Father Rolfus did almost everything for many, many years. And when Bishop Neary came, Father Rolfus, with his retirement, Bishop Neary wanted to divide up some of those tasks to make sure that we could have pastors in parishes. And so a number of us took on a variety of tasks. And Father Crane calls me also the vicar for the dead. So one of the many responsibilities Father Rolfus had was the management and oversight of the cemeteries, the diocesan cemeteries. Assumption in St. Cloud, Calvary in St. Cloud, and in 2009, Sacred Heart Cemetery, which had been a parish cemetery like yours, joined that corporation as well. So I'm learning an enormous amount and have a vastly greater amount that I don't know. So I really would like you to help me. I will say some of the things that I have learned in these last couple months. You've done it for many years, and so together we can learn more about this. So this phrase, I cheat, don't tell Father Crane this either. This is the opening prayer, the collect from the Mass for a funeral during the Easter season. But I often use it outside the Easter season too. It'll be our secret, because I think it's such a beautiful expression of Catholic faith. Through the ending of present things, God opens up the beginning of things to come, that there is a future. And really our cemeteries, as they exist all over the diocese, all over the United States, all over the world, are kind of a silent testimony to that article of faith, that I believe in the resurrection of the body and life everlasting. Every culture that we know, you think of the pyramids, you think of the burial grounds, had some way of memorializing and remembering and honoring those who had died in their communities. And Christians call their burial places cemeteries, which in Greek originally means sleeping place. Paul uses this, it's one of the funeral readings we sometimes hear, those who have fallen asleep. And it's not a denial of the reality of death. You always want to be careful saying this when there's children there, because they are afraid to go to sleep then if you overemphasize that. But it's because, like sleep, For us, death separates us for a time from an awareness of the world around us, and our relationships change. And then in the morning you wake up and you gotta get on 94 and fight the traffic and the cones. 40% of the GNP is in orange barrels, I think, around the country. And we awaken then to the usual responsibilities and the same problems we had before we went to bed. Christian faith says we will awaken into the presence of God, perfect joy. And so cemeteries, while it seems like Father Crane told me you can be the vicar of the dead, it's pretty quiet there. But really it is that kind of vibrant waiting for the resurrection that is memorialized there. So the cemetery, as I mentioned, is a sleeping place. Other cultures had a necropolis, a city of the dead, or barrows, or burial grounds. Christian faith intentionally chose this title. In the Code of Canon Law, Father Crane, we're going to actually come back to the code a little bit, but it is a sacred place. So I used to say this as a joke. When people say, let's have our wedding outside, we want to get married outside, I said, well, there's one sacred place that's outside, and that is the cemetery. And then last week, Scott called me from Assumption and said, we got a call to get married out in the cemetery. So we declined, actually. It's not the first time, but I just had this vision of being on YouTube with our cemeteries and this goth wedding or something, you know. That's not the background you want. But it is a sacred place, along with churches, oratories, chapels. The cemetery is considered a sacred place in the Code of Canon Law. It's a place of honor and respect for those who have died, those we know and were dear to us, those that are dear to other people that we don't know, but they're members of the body of Christ. Place of remembrance, where people can go. This is one of the concerns with, among other things, spreading ashes or, you know, just being kind of pasted into jewelry all over the country and things like that. That people need a place to go and have still this sense of connection, not only looking to the past, but also looking to the future. That there's a place to go and remember and go through that grieving process. It is a place of hope because of the resurrection. It's a place of healing that people can continue to go through the grieving process, maybe even because of our faith, maybe even make some reconciliation that is not possible during life, that people can find a sense of peace and forgiveness given and forgiveness received even after death. And, as I say, a place of public witness to our faith in the resurrection. There are various kinds of cemeteries. You can read all about this online or in law. Of relevance for us is parish cemeteries, but there are also corporate Catholic cemeteries like Assumption, Calvary, Sacred Heart. Municipal cemeteries, VA has cemeteries. I really like going to the Veteran Cemetery by Camp Ripley. I had the third burial in that place. When it was first opened, it was just a big muddy field, and it's really beautiful now. And it's a way to honor those who have served the cause of freedom. And you can also have private cemeteries. There was one cemetery had a burial out somewhere in this neck of the woods that the funeral directors didn't even know where it was. It wasn't on any map. Luckily, one of the morticians who dug the graves knew where to find that. There were like maybe 10 grave sites in this small private cemetery. There are some state statutes. We'll talk just a little bit about that. There's a few canons in the code, but most cemetery policies are yours. What is decided by the managers of individual cemeteries. And so we're going to be looking at some policies and best practices in the diocese, and we're going to send a survey fairly soon to all of you who have cemeteries. And some have a really robust set of policies. Others, it's, gee, I sure hope that somebody can answer this question. But what we're seeing, of course, is that for many generations, the same people, often the same person, was in charge of the cemeteries for decades. And then suddenly they're no longer able to do it, and someone inherits this responsibility, like me, and really has to learn on the job. So having a set of policies has a important range of values there. These are, sorry, this is so tiny. These are the few canons in the Code of Canon Law where possible the church is to have its own cemeteries, or at least areas in civil cemeteries that are designated for the deceased members of the faithful and properly blessed, where possible. If this cannot be achieved, however, then individual graves are to be properly blessed. And I've done that occasionally in a civil cemetery or county cemetery where you just bless the grave when a burial takes place. Parishes and religious institutes can have their own cemetery. I'll tell you just a brief story. So I had a funeral for one of the sisters at St. Francis in Little Falls. And it's literally just a plain pine box, plywood, unlined. And when they are going to lower the casket into the ground, the maintenance guys take the handles off. It's such a consoling sound with those cordless drills, you know. And they save them. It's so Franciscan to use them again. Why should we bury that good hardware, you know? So that's an example of a religious institute. I have some relatives buried out by St. John's in that cemetery there, along with the abbots and the monks out by Lake Sagatagan. Other juridic persons, families have a special cemetery or tomb. Bodies are not to be buried in churches, unless it's a question of burying in their own church the Roman pontiff. So if you go to St. Peter's, I think there's like 160 popes buried underneath St. Peter's of the popes. But the last canon is most important. Particular law is to establish appropriate norms about the discipline to be observed in cemeteries, especially with regard to protecting and fostering their sacred character. And that's where your policies come in. The goal of all of these is to make sure that the purpose and the dignity and the function of the cemetery remain in place so that they can fulfill their purpose for everyone. What should be involved? What's involved in cemetery management? Well, these are all the things that somebody does, and for many of you, you maybe do all of this or most of this. Oversight and governance. So in parish cemeteries, it's often the pastor, trustees, maybe pastoral council, maybe there's a separate cemetery board, as it's called, but they're not usually separately incorporated. I talked to Tom Jansen, the diocesan attorney. To the best of his knowledge, no cemetery in the Diocese of St. Cloud, other than those three that I mentioned as corporate cemeteries, are separately incorporated. They're under your parish tax ID, they're under your parish management. And so the pastor, by law, canon law, is responsible for those things, and that responsibility can be shared or delegated. And often it's you folks who end up doing that. When policies are revisited or decisions to be made, it is good to have more than one voice. And you need people with history. What has this happened before? What do we usually do? What went wrong in the past, that somebody can remember and help with those things. And it's good also sometimes to call around. What do you do? What are your policies say? To share, again, those best practices, or maybe learn from some of the mistakes of our peers. Public relations. Who communicates with the public, makes policy and decisions known. One of the things the U.S. bishops just recently encouraged was that the faithful should not choose alkaline hydrolysis, which is a way of dissolving the body chemically, and then there's no remains, really visible human remains, that can be interred somewhere or memorialized somewhere. Often it just goes into the groundwater or into the sewer system. It's about 300 gallons of liquids and chemicals, and the body is just dissolved into kind of a goo. Or human composting, where the body is sort of put in a compost pile, and these microorganisms are introduced, and the body is just kind of dissolved into compost. And there's no remains. So because this is new, and there will be other trends in funeral service, probably policies don't exist in many of your parishes. So that's an example of something that can be discussed and introduced. There's also the growing trend toward green burials, and that means, we'll come to that in a little bit, means different things to different people. So you want to have a clear understanding of what people are requesting. Who takes care of the property, the grounds, the maintenance, mows the snow, moves the lawn? No. And waters and weeds and weed whacks, all of those kinds of things to keep the cemetery neat and orderly and attractive. And repairs things. Some cemeteries have running water, some don't, some have wells, some don't. So some idea of how and when. This is the big one, of course. When do flowers go on and when do flowers come off? And what do you do when people don't comply? Inventory and development. What is the future of cemetery? What are the trends of burials, the number of funerals that you have? Do you have a mausoleum? Do you want to look at constructing a mausoleum? How will you pay for a mausoleum? Who does the sales for that? All those kinds of things. And then record keeping is extraordinarily important. Many of the state statutes do not apply to religious or church-based cemeteries, but some do, and record keeping is one. That you have to have a map of your cemetery, who's buried where, if a body had been misinterred and has to be moved, if there are in trust or in will the assignment of burial rights to another person other than the possessor of that certificate of burial, those kinds of things. And again, this is why, because these things go for decades and people change, having written records kept in perpetuity is really important for cemetery management. Sales. What happens when somebody has a death and they say, I'd like a place in your cemetery? Many times they're familiar. They're people that you know. They're people in your parish. But sometimes they're people who used to live there or had relatives who used to live there and want to have a burial place there. So to be able to answer those questions and conduct those conversations well. And then the books, accounting and finance. So for parish cemeteries, as you know, in the annual report, there's always a page with half the page, which is about cemetery finances. We'll come back to the money part in just a little bit, Joe. So here are some common questions that arise. Descent of title and deeds. And this is in Minnesota statutes. You can read all about them. There's only like 90 of them. It's maybe a pleasant half-an-hour read because most of them don't apply. A lot of them have to do with municipal cemeteries or cemeteries that are run by cities or counties. There's a much more rigorous set of record keeping and financial reporting and perpetual care responsibilities and all that. They're good ideas, but they don't apply in law to us. But this one does. If someone wants to assign, so you know this, we don't sell property. If you sell a lot, you're not selling the land. You're selling the right to a burial there. So people can say, well, I bought 3 plots, I'm going to park my camper here all winter, or put my fish house out here and see what happens. They don't own the property. They have a title to burial rights there, and they can be reassigned. So parents can buy a plot with 4 lots and then say this is for me and my spouse and our 2 adult children. And then maybe one of those children marries and they're going to be buried elsewhere. There's a grave that is unclaimed. They can, with a written document or in the will, assign that title to someone else. But you want paperwork for that. And you want an agreement of everyone in the family if it's not done by will or in some legal document, that everyone approves of this assignment of the burial rights to someone else. So burial rights can be reassigned in will, and they have to name a person. They can't say somebody else can have this grave or one of the kids can have this grave. You have to name who is intended to be in that spot. If there is no will, if they're intestate, then the right of interment passes to the spouse. If there's no surviving spouse, then to the eldest surviving child. If no surviving child, then the youngest surviving sibling. And if no survivors, then according to state statutes. So these are the kinds of things that I had to read it, I don't remember. Have an attorney. If you have legal questions about these things, contact an attorney who can help you through. I asked Tom Jansen who I should ask questions to, and he said, well, it's a really arcane part of the law. There aren't many people that know much about it. So he said, I probably know as much as anybody just because of experience. So he's my go-to guy. Hopefully we'll never have to ask him questions. Cremation. The Church, of course, permits cremation as long as it's not chosen for reasons contrary to Catholic faith. Up until the early 90s, you could not have the cremated remains present during the funeral. And that caused a lot of incredulity and some emotional pain for people. The norms were changed so now that the cremated remains can be present at the funeral. What the Church clearly says is the cremated remains should be interred either in the ground or in a columbarium or mausoleum above ground, intact. No jewelry, no spreading them around, no dropping them from the plane. One of the directors told me this story that this family, they wanted to drop Grandpa in the lake. And so they hired a pilot who was flying over, and then when he opened the window and opened the urn, all those ashes just kind of came back all over the cockpit and into his face and everywhere. It was not so beautiful or dignified. No jewelry, no dividing up little pieces of Grandma here and there, take some ashes with you. No tattoos. There's a variety of ways in which this, unfortunately, is being done now. We want intact human remains, either the body or all of the cremated remains buried somewhere together. And most places permit the placement of an urn on an existing plot, even if there is someone else there. So you can have, most policies read, a casket burial and an urn on a plot, or 2 urns on a plot, but not 2 caskets on a plot, not 3 or 4 urns on a plot. So politely explain these are our policies, and people will always have questions, or, well, we did it out in California. These are our policies, and we'd ask you to abide by them and have some reason, out of respect for memorializing your loved one. This is how we manage our cemetery. Encroaching graves. The last of the statutes in Minnesota law currently is about winter burials. And I remember when this happened. Senator Dave Durenberg's mother died. And it was in January, and they had the funeral, and then the cemetery told their family, we don't do winter burials. I said, well, you will now. And so they passed a law in Minnesota that you must do winter burials. You can charge more for it, You don't have to have a winter burial. You can store, and I used to do these when I was first ordained. You do the spring burials. There's a kind of a storage place. Sometimes the cemetery had them, sometimes the funeral home had them, and then you would go around in a day in May or June, and these families would come, whoever was able to come, and you would do the burials then. That's pretty much a thing of the past, so winter burials are done if the family requests them. But I bring up that because often burying in the winter, you don't see so clearly where the corner markers are. You need someone familiar with your cemetery. The people that dig graves are pretty good at this if they're familiar with your site. But sometimes, especially in the past, and you look at some of the cemeteries where the gravestones kind of go wavy, because it was hard to tell where exactly those lines were. Many places have now started putting in the ribbons of concrete, so it's pretty clear where all those graves and markers will be. But sometimes people are buried encroaching on another plot, and then they can be moved with, and this is in statute as well, you offer an alternative site or you offer to move. And here again, you might have to contact an attorney. And your cemetery is responsible for the costs if the grave has been misdug or the person's been buried in the wrong place. What happens if people don't pay? So they have they made a down payment or they made a request and the body is already in the ground, and then they say, we don't have money. Or they just never say anything at all. You don't hear back from them at all. So again, this is your policies that would govern this. This is a common practice. No memorialization, so you can't put out a marker, a stone, or headstone, or footstone until there is payment or until there is some kind of payment plan. Now, in case of someone who's really poor, they just can't afford it, you can make some exceptions or find some way around that. But people who are just deadbeats, you want to find a way to make sure that you have the funding to continue in the future to manage your cemetery well. Damage or desecration. This happens sometimes in the winter with snow plowing or snow blowing. Sometimes it happens in the summer with mowing or weed whacking where a marker or a monument is damaged. And that also becomes the responsibility of the cemetery and often whoever your contractor or vendor was, to try and work out with them a reasonable agreement for repairing and paying for those damages. If there are acts of desecration, monuments are tipped over, monuments are broken or damaged, graffiti, other kinds of desecration in the cemetery, or even, God forbid, a grave that is dug up, then you report it to law enforcement and you report it to the insurance carrier. Joe, Catholic Mutual would be the insurer for all the parishes, and I believe for our corporate cemeteries as well. So they will want to know what has happened as soon as you can. And then canon law talks about if there is desecration, there is a penitential rite, a kind of a re-blessing of that sacred place. Just as we would do for a church if it was desecrated, so we do with cemeteries. And then there are acts of nature. The tornado comes through. I vividly, it's so striking. I was pastor of Wadena for 4 years, and after I had left, not because I left, the tornado came through. Was it 97? I think that tornado. It was so, no, later than that. I left in 97. 2004? Okay. So we used to go and play volleyball every Saturday night, a small group of us, and that building was just gone. And the cemetery was full of oak trees, flat. All those trees gone. A few of the monuments were damaged, but, and this is a striking story, of course, the cross in the middle is absolutely intact, still standing, not damaged at all. Remarkable. So those things also are reported to Catholic Mutual. Cemetery funds may be used to repair damage if there is no alternative to, might have to pay your deductible. What would the deductible be for damage there, Joe? Still 5,000, okay. So if there's no other recourse, then cemetery funds can be used. And we'll come back to funding again. Who can be buried in your Catholic cemetery? First of all, according to the code, Catholic cemeteries are for Catholic faithful, but they're not restricted only to the Catholic faithful. Other persons may be interred in them in accord with Canon 1183, which Father Crane could recite for you verbatim. I cannot. But these are the things that are in there. So notorious apostates or schismatics or heretics, people who have abandoned the faith, and it's publicly known. So they've made a big show of saying, I'm no longer Catholic, and I think the Catholic Church is horrible, and I want everybody to know that. Things that you might know as parish staff that nobody else knows don't qualify for this. It's when it's very publicly known. Those who have chosen cremation specifically to deny Catholic faith, don't ask that question. Why are you your loved one cremated? But they will be very clear if they want to do it, that I don't believe in the resurrection of the body. I think we're just dust in the wind, like the Kansas song says. And so you want to deal with those things, and that's where you call the pastor and say, you talk to him. But this is a rare kind of circumstance. And those whose public funeral rites would cause scandal to the faithful. If you have any of these questions, call the chancery, and hopefully I won't be there and somebody else can answer that question. But these are rare things. These are rare things in the code and rare things in practice, but just so you're aware of that. In case of doubt, the local ordinary decides. So we would talk with Bishop, and he would make a determination or say, well, you decide and just don't tell me. In general, this is a kind of a general principle. If you permit a funeral, then you permit a burial. If you're going to have the funeral, you should not have a policy that says, well, we'll do the funeral, but you can't be buried here. They go together. And you can understand the emotional side of people's loss, and they will remember this for generations, how they were treated at the time of a loss. So err on the side of mercy. Today is the feast of Saint Faustina, and the Divine Mercy, always err on the side of mercy. Presumption is in favor of interment, unless there's a serious objective reason against it. So your policies should be as accommodating, as welcoming, as flexible as possible for burial in your parish cemeteries. But in any case, it needs to be regulated. So they need a burial permit. There needs to be a document of disposition that says, I have the right to bury in this place. And I don't know that we've had this. Those who've done it longer maybe know, where occasionally it can happen that someone just comes in the middle of the night and digs a grave and buries somebody there, like an urn or something like that, not a whole body. Those are problems, obviously. You should have no burials without the paperwork. Flowers, oh my gosh. Everybody chuckles because everybody deals with it. These are acts of healing for people. They're acts of honor for loved ones. They are a way of part of the process of grieving, and they're a sign of respect. At the same time, you serve many different families. And so uniform policies, we had a presentation in the diocese maybe 30 years ago. We hope to do something again in the relatively near future. But there was a deacon from the Archdiocese who was in charge of Minneapolis-St. Paul. in charge of their cemeteries, and I vividly remember him saying, when you make an exception, you've made a new rule. You've set precedents, and then people remember that. They might not remember the four Gospels or the Creed, but they remember this. So you want to be careful with the exceptions that you would make. Consistent rules are essential, but emotions are high. So the best thing to do is have written policies about flowers, monuments, memorials, and things like that. When they purchase burial rights, you hand that to them, ask them to read it, and sign it. Now, it doesn't prevent all of your difficult conversations, but at least you'll be able to say, this is your signature, you said you understood and would abide by these rules. It gives you a little bit of bargaining chip, at least that way. So if you have a rule that things come only on this date and must be off by that date, then ample public notice ahead of time about those dates, bulletins, social media, signage, whatever works for your setting, so that people know. And word of mouth is really powerful. You say, don't tell anybody, but the flowers are supposed to be off. That'll get around town quickly. Yeah, and then it's a good idea if you remove something to keep it in storage somewhere for a reasonable time. If people say, well, I was out of town, or we were on vacation, or my husband's father died, we were in California for the funeral, we weren't able to be there for the time, they can still claim those items. Don't just throw them away or burn them immediately. That there is a little window of mercy there granted as well. And they should all be in accord with the sacred nature of the place. And this, of course, gets you in some area of subjective judgment about, well, it's sacred to me, or it's important to me. So there's no way that you can pass a policy or have pictures of things that are acceptable and that aren't, that'll cover every circumstance. But you appeal to people's better judgment, and at times that's when you say, well, talk to Father, and then he can fight that fight. And then he'll say, well, I don't know, talk to the secretary. She's been here longer than me, or he's been here longer than me. So you know what some of those things might be. As people become less and less connected strongly with traditions of faith, these things are probably going to be more frequent. Where people they're not necessarily being rebellious, I have to remind myself every once in a while, they just don't know. And so it's an educational thing that you can offer to people as well. This is how we memorialize in our sacred space. Flowers, sprays, some kind of thing. And you have to decide about, the solar lights that will shine all night. Those kinds of things. There's always new decorations, but things do pass. Remember the unity candle at weddings? Never see that anymore. For a couple of years there was the sand thing, we mixed the sand. I haven't seen that for a while either. So fads do pass. But once it's in the cemetery, there it is. And it becomes, again, the uniformity and consistency of policy is a good idea, although not always easy to enforce consistently. Cemetery funds. This idea of perpetual care fund is in state statute. It's an area that doesn't directly apply to parish-based cemeteries, but it's an extraordinarily important thing to have. Either a separate account, that is your perpetual care fund, or at least very clearly restricted designated funds for your cemetery, for maintenance, upkeep, repairs, so that there's a reliable source of cash or investments or endowment or whatever form that takes for your cemetery. And I'm not even looking at Joe because I'm sure he's rolling his eyes. whatever form that takes, that you have funds that aren't spent on anything else. They're set aside for your cemetery use. So when you set your fees for burial permits, burial rights, selling your mausoleum spots or your grave spots, you want to have a kind of an actuarial point of view. What are our costs? What are our annual sales on average over the last 10, 15, 20 years? How much, what is the trends of costs of maintenance? What is our average cost of repairs over that period? How can we make sure we have enough cash that if nothing else happens, even if the parish finances tank, that we have sufficient funds set aside to maintain our cemetery in a noble and appropriate manner. Grounds, buildings, interment site, equipment, maintenance, improvements. Often we'll contract with people, not always, but maybe your parish staff does the mowing and the snow removal. Often that's contracted with other people, so they're responsible for their equipment, and they should have some kind of certificate of insurance themselves if they're your outside vendors that they present to you that you have on file. But you just want to account for all of those costs and your income and have a fund that will be responsible for overseeing the dignified and appropriate care of your cemetery. In general, designated funds are not to be used for other purposes, even temporarily. And insurance. So, Joe, would it be true that every parish that's insured, their cemetery, if they have one, is also automatically included? That's correct. Okay, so that is correct. Canon law talks about the importance of civil kinds of insurance for these assets that we have. What else should I say about that, Joe, about perpetual care funds?
If you have an investment balance, a perpetual care fund, if you have the proper investment balance, and the way to make that calculation would be, what are my annual expenses that I run through on our cemetery, not including burials at all, because now you're assuming that the cemetery is full and it's inactive. So what are my annual maintenance costs for that fund? And then what you're going to do is you're going to set up a separate perpetual care fund and use 5% interest rate. So, in other words, if you have $10,000 or make it $5,000 a year in maintenance expenses now that this cemetery is closed, a 5% interest rate, you're going to want to have $100,000 on hand. That's what you're going to do. Now, if your cemetery is larger and you're spending $50,000 a year, you're going to want to have $1 million set aside in a perpetual care fund. To get to that. And the way you do it is what Father described. When you sell a lot, part of that should go to your perpetual care fund, is what you're trying to do. So.
Thank you. I know one of our cemeteries that I'm currently working with, a parish cemetery, they will charge for parishioners. It's just the right of burial that is sold. There's a one-time charge for non-parishioners that is for the perpetual care. So it's a way to support that fund when you're not having people who make regular contributions to your parish or to your cemetery fund. It's just a way of looking towards the future. If you were a municipal cemetery in a city of 50,000 or more, and you have more than 10 acres of cemetery, then you have to have a fund that every 3 months you have to make a written report of all your finances to the county assessor, so you're spared all of that. And you can have no more, I think state statute says you can't have more than $500,000 per acre in your perpetual care fund, because it's not meant to be just a parking lot for investments or assets. It's for this purpose. Genealogy requests. My mother did genealogy, and she told me soon after I was ordained, maybe the first week or so, when people call you and want help finding graves, always help them, or ancestors, always help them. She had a vested interest in this, of course. It does take time, and depending on your circumstances, it might be reasonable to ask a small donation or even a fee for doing that, looking in your baptismal records or your death register for information about this. But only send them, even if you send them like a photocopy of that page, only that person's information, not the whole page, not other people's. Father Crane maybe mentioned this. Our register sometimes contains some surprises for people. And so my mother doing genealogy on my father's side, because she ran out fairly soon. You know, you get back in Europe, a lot of those records were destroyed in fires, wars, disasters, natural disasters. So she got so far with her side, started on my dad's side, 2 illegitimate children in Germany, 2 more when they came to the United States, and then they were married. So when we talk about, the decline of the family, it's not really anything new. These things happen in human nature. But so because of the sensitivity and the confidentiality of that other information, you can send maybe just that snippet of that person, or even just a written, yes, our register says that John Doe was born in Uppsala and baptized on July 7th, 2002, something like that. Okay. Disinterment, exhumation. If someone wants to exhume a body or open up the mausoleum, you want law enforcement or legal counsel involved before that would happen. So, extraordinarily rare, but you want authorities, civil authorities involved before that would happen. And then the cemetery and Code of Canon Law really also encourages support for indigent burials, people who can't afford it. So sometimes it's the county will have a small stipend for those who have no other resources, and there will be a very simple funeral and a very simple burial. Accommodate those things in Christian charity. There are some cemeteries in larger communities that are all for indigent burial, that people who can't afford it. But we want to have the same kind of dignified, worthy funeral rites. I wrote about this in the magazine, I think, a couple of years ago. One of the most powerful funerals I was able to be part of was this gentleman who came from China in the 1930s, unrest in that country. His family refused to come to the United States. He refused to go back. They never saw each other again. And he died, and there was a distant niece, 2 parishioners, the funeral director, and me at that cemetery. But it's at the funeral. It struck me, though, that the church does exactly the same thing. The exact same rite, the same ceremony, the same pall. That's the meaning of the funeral pall. It covers up all the individual circumstances of the person's biography because we're clothed in Christ. That's where our true dignity comes from. Made in the image of God, redeemed by Christ. Records. Father Crane perhaps went through this. In the code, each parish is to have parochial registers, that is, those of baptism, marriages, deaths, and others, as prescribed. The pastor is to see to it that these registers are accurately inscribed and carefully preserved. So I don't need to record everything, but I need to make sure that it's recorded as a pastor. Our canon law teacher said, here's a rule for the rest of your life. If you ever celebrate a sacrament or do anything that needs to be recorded, doing it before you go to bed that night. I'll do it tomorrow. I forgot to do it last week. I don't remember who that was. Did that ever happen? That's what can happen. So to record these things in a very timely manner. When the burial has been completed, a record is to be made in the register of deaths according to the norm of particular law. And you saw Father Crane's slide with the norm of particular law, and the Diocese of St. Cloud is largely blank on many of these things, so we need to develop some of that. But basically, if you look in your books, it will tell you the information that you need. It's really fascinating. So I was in Luxembourg for a while, and that parish goes back, of course, to 1872. We have older parishes than that in the diocese. But if you have a parish old enough for the pandemic of 1918-19, after the First World War, you will see 4, 5, 6, 8 people from the same family who died in very close time with each other. It was devastating. So the death register and the cemetery has also become a record of history. It's a really sobering kind of thing. What has the body of Christ all been through in time? So what happens? Our parish member died, and the funeral was in Sauk Center, not Sauk Rapids. So it should be every funeral you celebrate in your parish should be recorded in your death register. And notice sent, and it's also a good practice to record it in the death register of where the parish membership was. So there'll be kind of 2 records of where it took place and what happened to your own people. And then a notation that said the cemetery of burial is, the funeral took place on this date in this place. So these records are helpful for looking in the future. I know the parish secretaries, at least maybe all of you, were asked this question about cemeteries without a funeral home. This is a trend we're seeing more and more often, like the Cremation Society, the Neptune Society, where people don't have any interaction with a funeral home, maybe for the cremation, but if you go with one of those entities, they don't have any funeral home involvement at all. And so people will come to the parish and say, here's Grandma's urn. We want you to write an obituary, put it in the paper, make funeral plans, plan the liturgy, do memorial cards, and all of that. It takes staff time. It takes, again, emotions can be very high, and sometimes these are folks that are new to your community. They don't have really a history with your parish, and so we're working on some best practices for how to manage that. The Presbyterial Council in the diocese has looked at that and sort of promoted some best practices, and if you don't have that, we can get that to you. Some charge a small additional fee, some would charge a kind of an a la carte fee, and some have a rather exorbitant fee to try and discourage people from doing this. But we want to be accommodating to people as well. If you have a policy book, what should be in there? Everything that I've had up there. Some way, and we'll work on maybe some kind of template for what should be in a policy book. I don't have it developed at this point. But any of the questions that you faced, any things that your peers face, let me know, let us know, so that we can make sure that suggested practices or policies are as comprehensive as possible. As I say, you'll never be able to address every possibility, but it's good to have some readiness for common questions. You can look there, the Minnesota Revisor has all those statutes, fascinating reading. Get a cup of coffee and maybe a couple scones, if you like scones. Joseph Sangovich and Associates, I didn't bring those books, I meant to. There's a set of books that have cemetery management, accounting, perpetual care funds, sales, a lot of information. There they are. You want to hold that way up? So they publish those, they're available at their website. And then the Catholic Cemetery Conference also has some documents around cemetery management questions. Anybody have other resources that you rely on? Okay. Apparently that's it. So, other questions or comments or things that I've said where you're thinking, where did he get that? That's not true. Yes? Oh, I'll get back to you.
You had said that a burial permit is required, so is that specifically the disposition permit, or would a certificate of cremation be okay?
One or the other.
One or the
Yes, and if they work with a funeral home, they will supply that.
Okay.
So if they don't, that's when you need some documentation. And like the Cremation Society of Minnesota is supposed to provide that to families as well, but they don't know what all these things are. So somewhere at home on the counter. Yeah.
On a cremation, if a family buys one plot and one of the members wants to be whole and one wants to be cremated. Okay, so what happens when the first one dies and it's cremated? Can you consume that cremation up and put the second one whole and put the cremation one on top after the fact?
No, understood. Cemeteries will vary. In Minnesota, virtually every cemetery has a policy that you must have a vault. And increasingly, they make small cremation vaults as well. And the reason for this largely is long-term maintenance, because the grave will sink, the ground will subsume, and that takes a lot of work to kind of keep that level. So you talk to whoever digs your graves. I don't think that would be a problem myself to move simply to accommodate the family's wishes and then reinter in that way. So let me just say a word. Green burial means different things to different people. One of the things that is more commonly done now is a bottomless vault. So the casket, a wooden casket or just a cloth wrapping, and the body can decay naturally into the ground, but because you have that vault above that handles your ground issues where the ground will subside. You'll want to have some kind of conversation with your funeral directors in the area and the person that digs your graves. What do you want to do? Other questions or comments? Yes?
The cremation certificate or the disposition certificate, how long do we have to keep those?
It's a good question. Those you should keep in perpetuity. The disposition, the burial permit or disposition document. So you can, even if you scan some of these things, you should keep the paper copies as well.
You mentioned that every funeral mass should be recorded in your book, in your Sacramento register. We have a situation where we have a burial, but they're not a member of our parish, they're not having a funeral mass. Do I also record that?
Yes, thank you. So we don't actually have, I don't know what your books say. There are different publishers over different times. Most of them are just called death registers rather than funeral registers. So if you have a burial in your cemetery and the funeral wasn't there, it would be recorded in the same way. And you would say person's name, date of birth, age, whatever your normal columns are, and then just a notation that the funeral took place elsewhere, but they're buried in our cemetery. Some places just say the cemetery burial, other will have, lot and plot, kind of an indication on where on your map. One of the things that we're going to probably try and do is we've got people with drones now, some aerial photography, because as cemeteries grow over time, things are not always in line. And some burials were, they didn't really encroach, but were 2 inches here and then 3 inches over here, and then pretty soon, at the end of the line, there's a lot missing because there's no room left. So to have a visual map of your cemetery, who's buried where, what lots are already sold, and to whom or who has the burial rights is really, really helpful, especially if you're no longer doing the job and someone else inherits this and new to the parish, new to all these people, I don't know what was agreed to. So if you do have some unusual things, have a place where all of this is recorded. You know, John called and we made the agreement that when his wife dies, this is going to happen, so that there's some record of it, because don't trust memory like mine. You're sure you remember, but it gets fuzzy when 12 other things happen at the same time. Yes?
When you were talking about the green burial, is that accepted by the church?
So green barrels, depending on what they are anticipating. So some people, when they say green burial, they mean the alkaline hydrolysis, and that is something we would not permit. Or they would mean burial without a vault, or burial without... So if someone chooses to be buried, and this happens all over the world, even in Catholic parishes, where there's no embalming, because the facility doesn't exist. It's just customary. So I remember talking with Father Rich Walls. He was down in Venezuela. If someone would die, you'd get whoever you could within a couple hours and have the funeral, because they didn't embalm and there wasn't time. You didn't want to wait too long because of decay. So they would just do funerals right away. That would be an example of a green burial that would be certainly acceptable under those circumstances. But if people are talking about hydrolysis or the composting, that's not something we would support.
So you were explaining that some of the vaults don't have a bottom.
Correct.
That would be okay?
You would want to have that conversation with your own cemetery and what policies you would like. I think it is being done in various parish cemeteries already. But again, your vault company, I don't know if they would have that available, and what precedent you want to set in your own site. Yes?
So if somebody has a miscarriage and the fetus was buried in a local cemetery with the unborn, and then they had a private mass at your church, would you still record that as a funeral or a death? My answer would be yes. I think it's a gap, certainly, in the church's pastoral care about how we respond to people who've had miscarriage and what happens. If there are a visible body that can be honored, then I think, yes, it should be recorded if the parents choose to do so, and that this was a stillbirth or an early birth or a... I was reading this the other day, this all blurs together. What in Minnesota law, stillbirth is, I think, designated after 4 months gestation, 3 months gestation, I can't remember. Does anybody know? 20 weeks? Okay. 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 So I think as long as you're consistent with it and as long as it honors family wishes. Some people just don't want to, and you have that pastoral conversation with them. But if they do want to, I would not refuse it. Yes?
And discovered that many funerals have not been recorded from years ago, probably as late as 10 years ago, and there's no cremation certificates or anything for them. Can you still record them, or do you have to have a certificate, or how do you go about doing that?
That would be a good conversation with an attorney, I think, because there is some legal ramification there possibly for the future. I think you can make a record that says certificate not found or not available, so that you have some record of what has happened.
and then keep searching for those documents if they're there. Yeah, I remember being in one parish which will go unnamed, and someone called looking for a baptismal certificate back in the 30s for after death and some insurance purposes. And the pastor at the time stopped recording anything in 1925, and he was there till 1942, except there were like 2 baptisms. You can't tell me you only had 2 baptisms. Who knows why? So while record keeping does seem fussy at times, it really is a gift for the future, and for you don't know whose life you'll all touch having those records intact. Yes?
In reference to making a cemetery directory available for public use, what is a good way to do that, to make it available for people to come and find out where grandma is buried?
So the question is about a cemetery directory or something. I think what Assumption does is a fine way, so there's the parish office or the cemetery office and a map and with numbers, and then they can look it up and tell you where that grave is. There are some virtual services. There's what's it called? Find a Grave, I think, online. But that usually tells you what cemetery, but not where in the cemetery. There's some, it's a nice thought, but sometimes you want to be careful with information that's too broadly available to people. So if you have some way that they can consult and get the help rather than just have a record that anybody can access, I think that's the wisest thing. It sounds strange, but it does happen. To my knowledge, not in the Diocese of St. Cloud, but it has happened where people find out where the grave is and then dig it up or move in the middle of the night. Someone's been in our cemetery and disinterred this urn or this body or broken into a mausoleum. So that's why you want some record of who's asking and why. Yes?
Is there a legality or a church policy to cremation and having a vault?
So cremation is permitted, certainly. Whether there would be a vault with that cremation interment would be your local policies. It's a more recent development that they've started making these smaller vaults for urns. Okay. Joe, thank you all very much.